Hey, welcome to 10 Within. Thank you everybody for tuning in today. So today I wanted to talk about boundaries and I want to talk about what it is to have like hard nose. And I think that the reason I wanted to cover this because I think that it's so important in life. I think in order to understand who you are and to hold yourself accountable to the things that are happening around you and to truly have self-respect and self-love, I think it starts with knowing your boundaries and knowing your hard nose. For me, growing up, I had a really hard time with boundaries and having hard nose because I definitely dealt with trauma, right? I think that I dealt with abandonment stuff. And I think what gives you strength is having hard lines, hard nose, and hard boundaries and being clear with those. And I think that the best way to learn boundaries for you, and everyone's boundaries are going to look different, right? Everybody has their own things that are goes in their life and their own things that are just no goes in their life. And my boundaries could be different than your boundaries. I believe as like a human being, we kind of all have like the core sense of boundaries. But everybody might have their own little twist on things, right? And I think that it's important to know yourself. I was actually listening to a podcast by Ed Milet, and he had a doctor on there, and he was talking about um, graciously getting to know yourself, right? Graciously learning who you are as a person. And I think that the disconnect that we have in the world today is the disconnect between one's self. We don't know who we are. We don't know what we stand for. We don't know our hard line. When you don't have boundaries or lines, and you don't really stand for anything, what's the saying? If you don't stand for anything, you fall for anything. Is that, I think, is a very rough place to live in, because when you feel like you just get beat up, right? Because you're just kind of getting punched all around because you're not stabilized on your feet because you don't know the foundation of who you are as a human and what's acceptable to you and what is not. And I think with clarity comes strength, because when you're very clear on who you are and things that you want in your life and things that you don't want in your life, I think that it's a lot easier to remove and attract those things, right? So I'm going to share a story with you guys because I think that this might maybe help others learn how to learn who you are, learn how to get to know yourself, learn what maybe your triggers are, maybe what your brokenness is. I have been working with a body synergy coach for probably, my gosh, 8 years now. And she has helped me so much go down my timeline, right? My timeline of my life. And learning about who you are is so important to who you are. I don't know how many people are like me that remembering was really hard for me. Like remembering my past, remembering like my timeline was actually extremely difficult. And the reason I actually even started seeking healing was because I suffered from severe panic attacks. I've had anxiety. I think my very first panic attack, I think I was actually 12 or 13 years old. I'll never forget it. I was in Riverside. I was at my Aunt Karen's house, and I was walking from her house to my best friend's house, who was like one block over. And there was a horse trail that I would cut through to go to her house. And I was by myself, and I was in between my aunt's house and my friend's house, and I was on this horse trail, and I had this wave of panic come over me. I'd never experienced a panic attack before. That was my very first one, and it terrified me. I remember running back to my aunt's house and sitting like on her couch, and I think they gave me like a brown bag. Like I was like hyperventilating, right? I was like breathing into the bag, and they called like 911. Like it was this big ordeal. Well, once you have the very first panic attack, in my experience, is it such a terrifying experience because you literally feel like you're dying, that you now live your life trying to avoid panic attacks, right? Because you never want to feel like that again, which to me ultimately creates more anxiety. So I would try to avoid that walk, right? The walk to my friend's house, because I was like, oh my gosh, like walking from my aunt's house to my friend's house alone is how I felt that way. I never want to do that again. Well, unfortunately, and with anxiety, when you avoid it, it starts to become stronger and stronger and stronger, and it will show up like in other areas, right? And so throughout my life, and this is looking in hindsight, this I did not know this information obviously at 13, 14-year-old Loni. I didn't know this at 18-year-old Loni. I didn't even know this at 20-year-old Loni, right? I started learning this once I seeked healing for anxiety and through a body synergy counseling session. That's the type of therapy I choose to use. Because it's more than just talking therapy. It is like sensory therapy, right? It goes through your body and how your body feels and things that we actually hold in our sensory system of the reminder of what you felt. Even though I was 13 years old, your body can store it as if it was happening yesterday. Like it has no time reference like we do in like our brains, like on a calendar. Our body doesn't know if it was 10 years ago or if it was 10 minutes ago. We can store things in us as if it's happening right now. And that's why we carry so much stuff all the time, and it just affects us so much. Even though it happened 10 years ago, you're like, well, that was a long time ago. If you haven't dealt with it, if you haven't released it, if you haven't acknowledged it, it can still be manipulating and running your life as if it happened to you 10 minutes ago. And so going down my timeline, I remembered my very first panic attack. I remember how it just kind of started escalating. For me, I would get really bad anxiety whenever I'd leave my house. And when I say leave my house, I don't mean like going to the gym or driving my kids to school. It was more of like vacations, right? We would go to the river a lot. We'd go to the desert a lot. And it was anytime I would leave to go on vacation to relax was kind of the key factor here of what I've learned. My body didn't allow me to do that. Being like relaxed and at peace and not like constantly at stress and just busy mind always running and going was the trigger for me. And so it took me, I'm going to say a solid maybe 4 or 5 years, but I was actually able to fully overcome my anxiety. I have not had anxiety, a panic attack. I'm going to go with that. I'll get anxious feelings like, oh my gosh, like I feel that anxious feeling. But I've learned how to not stuff it down, not run from it, not avoid it, but to look at head on and be like, okay, what is happening? What is this coming from? Why am I feeling this way? And I'm not scared of it anymore. And it's so liberating because I feel like that's genuinely what healed me ultimately of being able to have anxiety attacks. And again, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not any of those things. All I am is a woman that suffered with severe panic attack disorder since I was probably 13 years old, and it would come and go. There'd be certain times in my life when it'd be high. Like I remember like my mom would leave to go to the gym when I was young, and anytime somebody would leave, it would set off that like, oh my gosh, I'm alone feeling, right? Hence where my trauma came from, was the abandonment of feeling alone, being scared that, I didn't know who was going to be around at what time. So it was always like anytime I felt that I was alone or unsafe, like from my home, that it would be that trigger for me. And so going down my timeline teaches you to kind of remember the things that happened in your life. Now, I'm going to share with you, it's not pleasant to go down your timeline. And I think that that's why a lot of people avoid it. And I think that a lot of people avoid healing today because it's uncomfortable. It's sometimes awkward. Sometimes, I mean, my gosh, there's people that terrible things have happened to them in their life. I'm blessed enough to say that I'm not one of the 3 women that's what it happens to statistically that been, molested in their life. Like things like that haven't happened to me. But I've come from trauma in the sense of broken families, broken marriages, unstable childhood growing up. And honestly, I'm a firm believer, and this is not even a believer, this is scientific evidence that generational things also carry into your being, right? On a DNA like level of genetics, the trauma from our great grandparents to our grandparents to our parents can get passed down to us on a genetic level. And we also carry things like that too. So your timeline honestly could even go further back than your lifespan. And you can literally go, if you know the history of your family, into the history of what was even before you. And so quickly about me, and I know I've shared this briefly, but the week that my mom found out she was pregnant with me was like literally the same time that my mom found out my brother had cancer. He had leukemia cancer. He was diagnosed, I believe, when he was like almost maybe 4, because we're about 4.5 years apart. And so when I was born, actually when I was being developed in the womb, my mom was under significant stress. I mean, my brother was dying. I mean, leukemia back then was pretty much like a death sentence. This was back in the 80s. And so they were terrified. And so me, I have actually a very calm demeanor naturally. I'm a pretty like level-headed person. I think I got that from my dad's gene. My dad's very just like this. My mom's a little bit more like this. And so my sensory system was on such high alert when I was being developed because my mom was under so much stress. She was terrified. I mean, I can't even imagine the fear of somebody telling me that my child at 3.5, 4 years old had leukemia and the chances of them surviving were very slim. And all of the things that my brother had to go through. I mean, the amount of pain and treatment and sickness that he struggled with for years and years and years is heartbreaking. And it ultimately, I mean, he ended up surviving it. He was one of the very few that survived leukemia back then. I think there was so many kids in his unit, and I think he was like the only one that survived, or one of the few that had survived. And the amount of pain that he went through, it affected his life in so many ways. It affected his cognitivity, it affected his abilities, it affected him in so many ways that he never was able to live the life that God created for him because the sickness truly stole so much from him. And so my mom, and my dad going through that, having a kid so sick, everybody dying around you, that type of stress and just chaos and fear stemmed from me from in the womb, like is when it started. So then I'm born, parents got divorced when I was 5, and that was just very unstable. It was like with my dad a little bit, with my mom a little bit, with my aunt a lot, just never really had like a stable home environment until I became like an early teenager, maybe like 12 or 13 years old, maybe even 14. I'm not exactly sure on timelines. One thing when you have anxiety that you really have a hard time with memory. And I think it's because you're always in this fight or flight state. You don't even realize. I've learned that too. I'm always like, what is wrong with me? Like, why can't I remember anything? And it's funny that the older I get, the better my memory gets, is because I don't suffer from that state of panic anymore. But for my entire growing up, I was always in such this fight or flight mode that you don't have a good memory because of that. And so if you suffer with anxiety, you probably understand that like you don't remember anything. And it's because you're always in survival mode. Like you're never fully present of like what's happening and paying attention. Is because you're always trying to struggle this battle that you're battling within, that you're not showing up present. And I think a lot of times it can affect relationships. It can it could affect friendships because people don't see what's going on inside. They only see what's going on the outside. And a lot of times I feel like I'd be just so disconnected because I was just fighting this internal battle all the time. And I didn't share it publicly with a lot of people. My closest friends would know because a panic attack would come over me and I would freak out, right? Like, I mean, I'd panic. I would be like, oh my God, I can't breathe. Like it was just, I thought I was dying. And so, and I started getting more and more certain triggers. And so started going through healing therapy, body synergy therapy, cranial sacral therapy, lymphatic drainage therapy, like body synergy therapy. They work on your body from literally your head to your toes. And about 4 years later, like I was saying, is I have, as much as I've gone through in this life of going through a husband with cancer, losing him to cancer, having to become on my own and, figure life out, into another relationship, going through a divorce, navigating all of the uncertainties of life, I've never one time felt that anxiousness. And I thank God for it because God, I think, truly allowed me to heal it. So I was strong enough because being alone was one of my biggest fears, and especially for a trigger for anxiety, that when my mom would leave to the gym when I was young, or when somebody would leave, or if even if I was driving alone when I was a teenager, or if I was camping and we were in the middle of the desert, and it was like at home, but I felt like I was kind of still alone, like in the middle of nowhere. Those types of things were like my triggers, a trigger of being alone. So now in my life, well, obviously when my husband died, I was alone and with 2 kids, and then going through a divorce, you're now alone. And it's crazy how I ultimately was able to heal that element. And again, like I said, I'm not a doctor. I would never advise anybody to, just stop any medications, this, that, but healing is possible in our system. And I've always been a firm believer of this. And anybody that knows me knows is that when I was 17, 18, severity of the anxiety was so bad that it was just miserable. And so I remember going and I just wanting to like, what do I do? Going to the doctors and they're just like, take this medication, take this medication. And I'm not a big person that likes to take medication. I'm just not. And so I just remember thinking like, that cannot be like the only reason. And I was young, like, and still like, I just like questioned it, but I tried. I tried taking the Xanaxes and I tried taking, the Valiums and I tried taking, the anti-anxiety medications. And honestly, none of it really worked. If anything, like I remember I'd be on vacation and like I would just be so tired. And like, I'm like, now I feel nothing, right? I just want to go to bed. I wasn't having fun. It wasn't exciting. Like I was just tired and numb. And I was like, this is not what I'm looking for. Like I want healing. And obviously at 17, 18 years old, I didn't even know what that looked like. So I just suffered. I mean, and again, I'm very strong minded for sure. I think that is my superpower, that even though it was such a struggle, I was never going to let it take over my life. I would still do the things that gave me anxiety. I'd still go to the vacations. I'd still go on the trips. I'd still go and do the things. I just knew that anxiety was going to be part of the plan, right? It was like, I just knew that a couple nights of it, I was going to be very uncomfortable having panic attacks. And it was just something that I just almost adopted into my life, like part of my life, right? And it sucked. I just remember telling my late husband at the time, I was like, I would not wish this feeling on my worst enemy. It was terrible. I remember saying I would rather literally lose like my limbs and live a life like disabled than have this disability of anxiety, because it was so miserable and exhausting and terrifying. Anybody that has anxiety and panic attacks knows it's like the most terrifying, uncomfortable feeling under the sun. And so years and years and years I struggled. And again, it would come and go. Like there'd be seasons in my life where I was like, oh, okay, good. Like I'm good. Like I didn't always have anxiety, but then when it would come on, man, like it would come on strong. And then I'd go through like seasons where it was really bad and then it would kind of start going away. And this is just how I lived from basically 12, 13 years old to about 30, 32, 33-ish maybe, until I started seeking counseling and help. And so, fast forward, the way that I believe that you can heal any element, I don't care if it's depression, if it's anxiety, if it's just clearly just being disconnected from yourself. I think so many times, and again, I'm not a doctor, so I know that there is a chemical imbalance that happens in people. I know that chemically we can be out of whack. However, I do believe when they say a chemical imbalance, I think that is like a genetic imbalance. I think that we are carrying something inside of us that we cannot understand or comprehend that is making us feel down, making us feel off, making us feel anxious. Going down your timeline and learning who you are and learning about your life and even possibly your past, and I think can help in so many ways of heal so many things. The society, and I say this all the time, is we are broken, wounded human beings. All of us are. We all have some sort of trauma wound. I don't care if it was from our life or if it was from a previous life. We have them in us. And that is not Loni Morris saying that. That is, again, scientific evidence that things that have happened in our lives carry with us unless we acknowledge them and learn to let them go. And I think because we're so bombarded with information all the time and we're just such a busy society, is people don't take the time to get them know themselves. And like I was talking about the podcast that I was watching with Ed Milet, and he had a doctor on there. Gosh, the doctor's name was what? His name was Dr. Paul Conti, Conti. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but he had talked about the importance of healing emotional wounds and how it truly over affects who we are as a human being and our mindset and how we show up in the world. He actually went as far as saying it's trauma is the invisible epidemic that's happening in the world today. And I believe that so much with all of my soul, because people do not know how to look within. People do not know how to go down their timeline. People do not know how to stop and truly get to know themselves. He talked about compassionate curiosity about ourselves. Learn about who you are. When you learn about who you are, you learn things that are your triggers. You learn things that are your values. You learn things that are your core makeup of who you are, and who God created you to be is a pretty awesome person. And we all are different. We all had different life experiences. My reality is definitely going to be different than somebody else's reality because of my life experiences, right? The things that I was raised with, the belief patterns that I was, instilled with as I was growing up. Everybody's realities are going to look a little bit different. We can all look at the exact same thing and we all see something completely different based on who we are and our life experience. And I think that that's why one of my favorite books in all the land is the Four Agreements, because it just talks about that. It just talks so highly about nothing anybody does is ever about you, right? It's because we all have our own perception of what our reality looks like and what is happening around us. And my perception is different than somebody else's perception. And I think that healthy communication is not communicating to convince, it's communicating to understand, trying to understand where somebody else is coming from. And I think healthy humans with clear boundaries and that know themselves are able to do that a lot better than somebody that's just so disconnected from themselves that don't know who they are at all. So how do you come up with healthy boundaries, and how do you come up with hard lines? Is A, first knowing who you are, and B, finding out your values and your moral code and standing for something, right? If you stand for nothing, you fall for anything. That has always been one of my favorite sayings, is you have to stand firm in your belief system and who you are. And that is what self-respect and self-love is. If you just let the world manipulate you and you just kind of get pushed around and you just always are accepting everything and anything goes, is that you're not honoring yourself whatsoever at all. And God wants us to honor ourselves. And having healthy boundaries truly is going to help you form healthy relationships. It's going to help you have healthy communication. It's going to help you just have a healthy self-love, because you're just like, wow, like I know who I am and I like who I am. I love who I am. And it matters to me when people do things to me that I think are acceptable or not. And I think that that is what is important here. If there's anything that I've learned, is that I know how I deserve to be treated. I know what type of example I want to set to my daughters. It is important for us to understand that you matter, your feelings matter, your values matter, that you are an important person, you're an important piece in this world. We all have our parts to play, but if we're not standing strong to who we are and holding those boundaries, then Satan comes in and just manipulates and just, I feel like, tortures you within, because you're just constantly going against yourself, right? You're constantly going against your natural self. So if you want to have healthy boundaries in your life, what I would recommend is becoming a healthy human first. And I think that the way that you truly do that is, number one, is connecting with God. And I know that we all believe in different types of gods here. I believe in Jesus Christ. And I know I make that very clear, as I'm a Christian. And I think that as soon as you connect with the higher power in this world, you connect with that inner knowing. I think that guidance, that internal compass, that is going to show you who you are. It's more of a feeling, right? You're just kind of like, okay, like it's a guidance, it's a connection. It's just, you just know when it feels in alignment. It's feeling. I can't describe it besides the fact as you connect with God and you're like, okay, Lord, show me, guide me. Who am I, and what is this? What is my purpose? What is my calling? Where do you want me to be in my life? Connect with God. 2, take care of yourself so you're clear, right? For me, because I've dealt with anxiety for years and years and years, working out has always kind of been a non-negotiable. I always say I don't really work out as much as now. Obviously, I want to do it to be physically fit, because I'm going to be 40 this year. I'm like, I'm going to go to my 40s being the most physically fit I've ever been. But working out for me always in the past truly was more mental than it was physical. It was like a non-negotiable. I had to, right? I had to get that energy out, or else it just felt really, really crummy. So for me, number one, working out and eating well. When I'm drinking a lot, when I'm eating crappy foods, it makes those feelings just peak up. You just feel like you have this dark cloud over you. You just feel crummy all the time. taking care of our vessel and our body is so important for ultimate health, to have clarity, to be able to feel good enough to get to know who you are. When you're feeling tired and sluggish and brain fogged, anxious or depressed, stuck, frustrated, whatever all the feelings are that you're feeling, that's because you're just not honoring yourself. And the best way to honor yourself is to take care of yourself. Especially as moms, I believe we just unfortunately just let ourselves go so often because we just are so busy of taking care of everybody else. But it's so important to lead by example. We want our kids to have amazing lives. We do so much for them. So they're thriving all the time. They're having success. They're doing all the things. We want so much for them. But when did we forget about us? And this is our life too. And that we only get one go around at this. And just because, we're now, almost 40 years old, doesn't mean that our life should lose purpose and that we should lose growth and that we shouldn't have things that we're working towards and striving towards. You always have to be growing, because if you're not growing, you are declining. Like, we don't just stay the same. You're either going up or you're going down. What way are you going? If you feel like you're going down, it's very easy to change that path and start going up. And that is by, number one, connecting with God. God, what is the purpose of my life? Not the purpose of my kid's life. And yes, being a mom could be part of your purpose. And that is why God created men and women, right? To build this healthy, strong families. But our kids do what we do, not what we say, right? So if we're not honoring ourselves by taking care of ourselves, by living in our purpose, by becoming the best that we can be, that's what they're going to ultimately end up doing, right? So that being the example. So if we're not honoring ourselves by taking care of ourselves, by living in our purpose, by becoming the best that we can be, that's what they're going to ultimately end up doing, right? So that being the example is number one. Taking care of yourself, eating healthy, connecting with God. I think the next step after that truly is being mindful of who's around you. I think that for me, many times in my life, that there's been so many seasons where I feel like I've always just wanted more out of my life. And it's really hard when you're not around people that are striving for more, right? And I'm not talking even just about more money. I'm just talking about more healing, more growth, more sobriety, more just clarity, more connection, more learning about being ultimately happy. So many people, I feel like, are just always masking with alcohol or partying or drugs or whatever it is, because nobody wants to feel. We're all avoiding our feelings because nobody's acknowledged things head on and worked on dealing with the things within, as we're always just running from them. And it's exhausting to be running from them all the time. And so being mindful of who you're surrounding yourself with truly affects a big part in who you become. Hard lines and hard boundaries, I set those in my life because there are things that will happen to you that are just unacceptable. And I'm not going to go into the details of my specifics of recent things that have happened to me that were just unacceptable, which have forced me into the path that I'm on right now. But the reason I bring that up is you have to know who you are. You have to wake up and connect with God and remember who you are and remember your worth and remember that you're loved and remember that right now you're enough. I think a lot of times for me, especially, is like you have so much pain and guilt and confusion that I beat myself up. And I know I've talked about that too, is like you beat yourself up that it's like, you almost feel like you're not worthy enough of setting these boundaries. And God quickly reminded me of like, Loni, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, remember who you are. Right now, you are my daughter. Right now, you are a mother of two daughters. Right now, everything that you do in your life is showing them what's acceptable and what is not. Right now, who you are, friend, is enough to start living the most amazing life that you want to live. How do you do that? How do you become that? Is every single day taking one tiny step and being a little bit better than you were yesterday. I will never sit here on the podcast and claim that I have it all together, that I'm the perfect human, that I have made it all the way. I have so much to go, and I'm so excited for that. But the excitement is that I'm going this way. I'm going up. Every single day, I'm a little bit better than I was yesterday. I learned a little bit more. God has released so many strongholds and chains over me. Every single day, my life just keeps getting better, better, and better. I keep getting stronger, stronger, and stronger. I keep getting clearer, clearer, and clearer. I keep getting more healed, more healed, more healed. And that's because I'm doing the work in the tiny, single, little steps that it takes every single day. I start my day off with God. God lead me in my life. I make sure to take care of myself every single day. I truly have been way cut back on drinking. I used to drink a lot, especially in this last season of my life. My mom was like, I've never seen you, Loni, drink as much as you drink. And I'd never felt so crappy as I've ever felt. Alcohol for me is just such a down pull. And when you struggle with anxiety or depression, anytime you do something that takes you up, it's going to take you low and it's going to take you even lower. If you're struggling, alcohol, and I know sometimes it's fun. I love to drink. I mean, I'm not going to lie, I do. But it feels so much better when you just are naturally happy, when you're naturally having a good time. I don't have to go drink to have fun. The reason I was having to drink so much to have fun is because I was miserable, right? I couldn't even stand the life that I was living in. I was miserable. So if I was drinking was the only time I was having fun. And then whenever I came down off of that and I realized that I was living in this really dark, unconnected spot, it would be the reality of like, oh my God, who am I? Like, where did I get myself? So connecting with God, taking care of yourself, slowing down on the drinking, working out at least 5 days a week. Every day you should be moving your body. I don't 7 days a week you should be moving your body. I don't care if it's just a walk around the block. Just physically move. Fill your head with good stuff, right? Every single day I made a promise to myself that I am going to every single day learn and fill my head with information that's going to get me to hit the goals that I have set for myself. And until I get to this certain goals, I'm not going to just allow myself to listen to crap and fill my head with things that are just not good. Not saying that I'm never going to watch a movie here and there. And me and the girls, my daughters love to sleep with me. And so we rotate every once in a while. And, one will sleep with me then the next night, which I love. I love having my girls in my bed. I love having that quality time with them. I love having just that snuggle, quiet time. And when they're with me, we'll watch movies once in a while. But when they're not, I just said, okay, Lord, I'm going to watch a sermon. I'm going to watch an education podcast. I'm going to watch something at bedtime to make me a better human and to fill me with tools in my life rather than crap. So again, it's living life intentionally, taking care of yourself, connecting with God, watching what you're fueling your mind with. And truly another one that is big is I've learned this a long time ago. I actually went through a course called Success Academy, and I actually became a neuro-linguistic programming coach. So I actually have my certificate to help people rewire their brain. I remember going through this. It was a pretty intense course, but it was so rad because it makes you so aware of the things that you're telling yourself, how they ultimately create your reality. So being intentional with my thoughts is something that I've been really intentional about lately. I'm very, it's very, not me, I think the human race, I think 80% of our thoughts are on repeat, right? Every single thing that we think, 80% of the things that we think about are on repeat just by pattern. So those thoughts that we're telling ourselves every single day truly become our reality. It becomes our life. And if you have a negative self-talk and you're constantly talking back down to yourself and you're constantly talking down to your relationships, your weight, your health, your wealth, whatever that is, whatever you're telling yourself is what is going to show up in your life. So being very intentional about my thoughts is something that I've been doing. And because I have ADD, writing out my thoughts, like when things will come to mind, I'll take a note on my phone and I'll literally say, okay, Loni, like, why do I have this negative pattern on repeat? Let's change that. And just changing one word of, getting in shape is so hard. That was a big one for me. Oh my gosh, the older I get, the harder it gets. Oh my gosh, putting on muscle is so hard. I would tell myself that all the time. So now I'm trying to be intentional, like, okay, the older I get, the easier it gets. The older I get, the wiser I am. The older I get, the more I enjoy to take care of myself. The older I get, the easier that it's going to be. I've just changed the narrative. Thoughts become your reality. It truly is the law of attraction. What you believe is what you become. What you feel you deserve is what you get. Why not declare and truly believe by just changing your patterns of what you tell yourself to work in your favor rather than work against you? Try it. It's so empowering. And it takes effort because it takes conscious living. It takes being aware of what you're telling yourself and to stop for a second. And that's why I love early mornings, because it's such a time of reflection. Check in with yourself. What are you telling yourself? And every single day, taking one tiny tweak. You don't have to change your whole communication system to yourself. That's not impossible. I don't think you can do that in one day. Truly, I don't. Maybe you can. I don't know. However, one day becoming a little bit better and catching yourself. Today, I'm not going to believe that. Today, I'm going to believe that I am a money magnet and that money is easy to earn and that money is everywhere and that I deserve to live this amazing life. Stop telling yourself that money's hard, that it's so expensive, that it's so difficult, that it's so this, that so that. Tiny little tweaks in your communication to yourself are life-changing. Neurolinguistic programming helps you do that, and it makes you just live life intentionally with your thoughts. And remember, they're patterned. The more that you work on it, the more that you tell yourself, the more that you'll start realizing that it just starts coming naturally. So being intentional with yourself and knowing your values, knowing who you are, going down the healing process, connecting with God, truly is going to help you have healthy boundaries in your life. When you set healthy boundaries and you have standards and you just say you have your hard no's for you are going to be different hard no's from me. But sit down quietly with yourself and just say, who am I? What are my values? And what is okay in my life and what is not okay? And then analyze it. Who in your life is crossing those hard no's? Have a conversation with them. If it's your spouse or your loved one, get on the same page. What are your hard no's? What are my hard no's? Let's respect and honor each other's values so we're not bitter and angry all the time. When somebody's crossing a hard no of yours and a boundary of yours all the time, it's painful and you get bitter and you get pissed and you live in this conflicted state. Any relationship, when you don't have boundaries, is an unhealthy relationship, period. So in your work environment, in your relationships with your children, with friendships, with family, having boundaries is such an important thing. Ed Milet and Dr. Paul Conti, go to his podcast. He talks a lot about having boundaries. It was pretty cool. It was a pretty cool podcast on that. There's so much education that you can truly take away from podcasts on that area. Again, I'm not claiming to be the expert by any means. All I can tell you, for me, the way that I was able to start having boundaries for myself is healing, learning who I was. Healing my anxiety was a huge one for me because I was always it took so much of my time and energy and effort. All my focus was always on anxiety. Well, once I was able to heal that, you can now start to go down the thing of getting deeper rooted things and just heal more and more and more. I believe it is our responsibility as the human race to help save our world, become a healthy human, raise healthy children. Do I have to say that I'm perfect? No, by any means I'm not. Am this a constant journey? Absolutely. But one thing I am is self-aware. And one thing I am doing is striving every single day to be a little bit better, and better. If you just take today, stop what you're doing, draw the line in the sand, say, today is the day that I am going to mark it off, that I'm going to do one thing for myself to go in the upward trajectory. One thing for myself to make me a little bit better than I was yesterday. What is it in your life that is holding you back so much that you just are so sick and tired of feeling sick and tired? What is it? Know who you are. Graciously learn yourself. Consciously pay attention to your patterns, to your timeline. Go down that timeline, learn who you are, love who you are, set your boundaries, hold to them, love and respect yourself, and teach your children to do the same. I think that formula, truly healing, becoming a healthy individual, is what we are lacking the most in the United States of America, which we're lacking the most in the world. Let's start with one person at a time, and that is you, and that is me, and that is doing our own internal work, being the change that we want to see in the world within ourselves, and teaching our children and maybe the people closest to us how to do the same thing. Let's become the healthiest versions of ourselves because our world depends on it, you guys. We want to save our country. The mental illness in this world is the worst I'd ever seen it, the worst anyone's ever seen it. I genuinely believe. And I think it's because we're so disconnected from who we are. People hate themselves because they're ashamed of who they are. There's no reason to be ashamed. We've done things. We've all done things. We all have past. We all have trauma. We all have problems. The great news is that God says, hey, look, I sent my son. He died for you to take all of that guilt, all of that shame, all of that sin away on him and say, I love you enough right now as you are. You, Loni, you, my friend listening, you deserve to live on the path that I created for you. I don't care what you've done in your past. Surrender it to me. Give it to me. Start right now. Every single day, one tiny little step in that direction. You're going to wake up in just a couple months from now and not even recognize who you are. Live your life intentionally, and it will change your life.